Shravani, what do you go modify? Okay, Chisholm, and okay. So we're gonna get straight into business without recitation at the beginning. Yeah, let's spice it up. So I have a few questions that people sent me, sorry. Let's begin with this one. Is it possible to ask Geshe for his instructions in visualization of Tonglen for the 4 immeasurables? Dila Temishi Gomdurwa. Temishi Gomdu Temishi Tantawe Tonglendi Gomtandi Geshe Kuntuinas Meba Kandechi Chegoyunas.
That's it. Good morning, everyone.
Hi. That's the translation.
Ringwanijana Nichunzo Julian Chunzonga Julian to Chasas.
So, given that this is the last day for this module, Geshe said that he should be asking you guys questions and see how well you perform, but you're still asking Geshe's question. So he needs to give his exam today. Anyway, let's see.
There's the other Kasoda Chitang Tonglen Gom Zulayako the Jamada Yorosra. In a semi shig Tony and Tonglen comes the 6 shizon chin. So 6 shizon chin drana and it's Zanga Yungres ra 6 piglia, dance at 6 geoenza, and a Sunjan Tamji, Deva the David and Denver Chichi Slaundi, Tishizon Gate, Tonya, Lena Karis Laudi, and Susu Devati, Patan, and deeds of the Sheng Dunga Sulene, and Susu Deva Patanya, but Dinji Migwa, Dindi Chichoras ra.
So looking at the 4 immeasurables, the words or the terminology that we use for the 4 immeasurables indicate the way that we should meditate on that, or that we can meditate on that. May all sentient beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So just these 2 lines indicate, you could say, the way that we practice giving and taking. May all sentient beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. So we can then visualize that we're giving our happiness and the cause of happiness to other sentient beings. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. Visualize that we take upon ourselves suffering and the causes of suffering.
The Dionelaya, the cousin round Royo, when a lot of sage, lot of Tango Chonaya, Tang Tuyagi. Lot of Godas ra. That didn't lot of Yonya so the Ninji somebody let that lot of church Peshio somebody's the Yomars love chocolates ra. There's that Ninji Jondang Ramadi ra. Tambopi Ninji lay a Komachako and a Tonlen laya, baby at the Jana Yaburis in a Yashiro di and Ninjilaya Quachaya chet, and Ninji Jedang remember the Hadon the Dang, Junju Droganza, and it Junju Shonema, and it some Jatamji, Devan Devatan, Dungam and Deva Chigurimba, Tanyam Tindiji Tony, then it ranks loud the Michigimba, Shens loud the Tameva Chigimba, and it shank turned to kitchen boyimba, Muyu kitchen boyimba, Tom Tony, and it shan't dunga the Tandugi Samba. Ninji Tindiji why not in it, and that Tony Nangi Lesser was ra.
And in order to practice that, we need to develop courage. The most important thing is to develop courage or determination in the mind to do so. And we spoke about it before, the way of developing courage. The greatest courage that could be developed is compassion. So when we generate that courageous, brave mind, the mind of compassion, we use that in order to then practice Tonglen in relation to the four immeasurables. And then in order to develop compassion, then we'll look at the last immeasurable that we recite. May all sentient beings be free from, may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from holding some as close and other as distant, free from anger and attachment. So when we use that as a basis for the development of compassion, in which we see others as being more important than oneself, which means other sentient beings' welfare, happiness, and well-being is more important than oneself, then we use that as a basis for the development of compassion. And with that courageous mind of compassion, when we practice Tonglen in relation to the first two immeasurables, may all sentient beings have happiness and the cause of happiness, may all sentient beings be free from suffering, the cause of suffering, it becomes very powerful. So that's with respect to this question. Now, Walma sent me also a message with a question. I'm trying to find it. Did you text it to me or email it to me? Sorry? WhatsApp. All right. WhatsApp. There it is. Oh yeah. There it is. So I'm currently focusing on the first three perfections. Maybe I'll share it on the screen. So I'm currently focusing on the first three perfections and compassion rather than wisdom. With my current brain and limited intelligence, I find concentration and studying wisdom just too hard most days. I would like to focus on generosity, ethics, patience, choice, effort, and compassion, maybe for the rest of my life. Is that enough? Is it better to do one or two things really well, or do a little bit on a wider range of topics? Tadi Quran nanla lobjun chedu ranjun chendu mixegi parchin tambo sumtola mikpa chedegiyos. Ani sena dila soba tan jimba ani andina Quran dila ninje dila yan dish betsun chedegiyos. Tadi Quran nangyun nebarwa. Ani Quran dende lo sem dende shuk nekabla shuk dende shida metan di mikpa chedegiyos. Ani ingin zingong tan shara goya di pe misiwa kale kabotongi dusa. Chezang kiran samna tanda negabla tingin zin tan shara negala pa shan. Mitse dila zo di ninje jimba soba dila soba di tundru dila mikpa chewaina digirves penadi dina ne ninje yamena soba yamena jimbala soba di yawo chichawaina mesegi dende shuk dende tumbaina dende chena yagarve yamena di tsama la betun che kasa che ne dende shuk chenbo maimba dende chage chawaina karachena yagares.
Resda chidang Geshe Tsultrim soba sobi nyamne di kerangi ani tengin zinda shirabgi pashingi nyamne le chik le lawe sota chik tongkuyo sarwas chik jina suzu ani kyew ngami pakchaki ani chik ninji kiya pigi ani soba gomya Tsultrim songya ani chik le lawe chik yung sigyo yiris tingi Chiralab shima sons. Ine ngonde ki pigi de chik ani chik jimbi ki nyamlen lan chugya soba gomdang ani chik Tsultrim songdang di tsawa sherab la ya tuk dewa chik. Sherab ki namchu yebi meji na ani soba gomya di le lawo ani Tsultrim songya de le lawo 아니 짐바 땅땅디야 비 남주여와나 아니 짐비 냠는디 베나다 춘춘지마도 마담바야냐 그 대한다 대마치 그라 그 sama 셔럽을 라랭도 나 셔럽 곰슬라운디 인지미 비 똥바니 코란 곰 되고야 내 솔직 송기요 말했어
내가 선랑윤 셋업세 데 믹스기 똥번디도 또
어디
생각을 최전 그런 티어 탄탄데 비시 똥번디디 칼레카고
어디
토번이 담을 디라서
어제 제 진짜 다 똥바니기 된디 치마치지 많고네야 가드이네야 우연에서 가리바디 땅으로 아니 짐바 땅다 소보공다 로바이나 에 셔럽 냠네 차고래 짐비 파지 냠네 차고라서 안고일라 마데바치니 아니 소보공기 아니 인지키기 슬라바이나 콜롤런 트랙 닝가 열어서
So in general, when we at least speak of the first three perfections, so the perfection of generosity, the perfection of joy, of ethics, the perfection of patience, and so forth. According to the question, it might imply that they seem to be easier than the cultivation of concentration or the cultivation of wisdom. So one question is it really easier? Are they really easier than wisdom or concentration? Well, of course, they can be easier for a certain individual based on the imprints that one have placed upon the mind stream in previous lifetimes. So for example, when you find it easier, it could be that because you have placed imprints for generosity, for ethics, for patience in previous lifetimes in your mind streams, and therefore in this life, they might seem to you a bit easier. But then still, through the cultivation of wisdom, becoming smarter or more intelligent, or wisdom in general, the practice of the other perfections will be made so much easier. Like, for example, with the development of wisdom, undertaking patience would be much easier. Also, with the development of wisdom, you can turn even a small token of generosity to be a very powerful action. So in my conversation with Geshe, I said that when you mentioned wisdom, I reckon that you were mainly focusing on or referring to the wisdom of emptiness or the wisdom of selflessness, which is what you find difficult. And Geshe said that, yeah, it is, of course, more complicated. Even if you find for the time being that it is hard to kind of get your head around the meaning of selflessness and emptiness and so forth, a point of beginning would be to ask yourself, what is reality? What is the way that things exist? Even if you don't go into all the ins and outs of emptiness, then thinking to yourself, asking yourself, what is reality? What is the way that things exist? And on that basis, practicing generosity, practicing ethics and so forth, it makes those practices more focused or stronger. Whereas if you make effort in practicing generosity, ethics, patience, and so forth, without asking yourself even once, what is reality? What is real? There's a danger that in the practice of these perfections, you will also misconstrue reality, which means that you will be doing it on the basis of an erroneous understanding of reality. So we don't want that to happen. So if we cannot for the time being get to a very subtle level of reality, still starting to question it to begin with is a good progress.
Rabina da sobokom slaundi sobokom zu di kongzhu kaya tere dasra kongzhu kaya gi tab yona mena di kongzhu di sai goya gi gyunzen meba toya chik tange dini ra samgor sra kongzhu nganzu bi gyunzen chi soni ani kongzhu sai ji orastra pi daji hengi doji marita kanji gyunzin chi sonchi ni gyunzin dindil teni nga kondro lesa samsamdo ska kwal yungu dasra di namchu ku mandangwa sewa na sherab ku mandangwa sewa kanji ngoyo nitsun tong matukwal teni 아니 균센 따난지를 때는 콘트로사기 여버디 패시브 차거레스라 안도 받제 주제와나 패시브 차거레스 진짜 서버 고면 타투버디 콘트로 가야들이 콘트로 가야 이 님보 연면은디 콘트로 사고비 균센메버 통해 콘트로 사야레 균센메버 통와이나 콘트로 가토 그레스 데마도 아니 깔카고 쇼레도 알아 아주 콘트로 가야도 빼 깔카고 그래도 알아 진짜 디 콘트로 가야도 깔카고 있나 아니 서버 고면디 레라우 차고 말다 다 비기 서버 고메디 서버 초그리 왔든지 곰 초그레스 수수 남 빈빈게도 수수를 제어 요사도 직 수수를 펜다사도 당연도 딘지려야 직 아니 서버 고메 간스 수수를 펜도비 찬 서버 고메디 용거 디 아니 깜디기 제소파신 두고 난게 소비냠네디 차기요 말레스 로 제소파신 두고 난게 소비냠네디 서버 초리어 마송바 탐질에 소보금 두게디 디그 짜와디 아니 닌지레야 투바 닌지그 짜와디 조 닌지 약슈디 도드메비 닌지케디 셔럽을 때는 끼고 드리지 송구도 왔으라
So for example, with patience, we practice patience in order to arrest anger, in order to put a stop to anger. And in order to do that, we need to be using a certain analytical process through which we see that there is no reason to become angry, that anger is not reasonable. So when we use a reason, when we take up a reason to put a stop to anger, this is when we practice patience. So here we're dealing with not innate levels of anger, but with anger that we feel that is justified, that is reasonable. So we encounter a certain situation which doesn't work out for us, and we think that because of such and such, I'm getting angry, which means that in our mind, we have that idea that in this particular case, anger is justified. Anger is a reasonable response to a certain situation. So what we want to do is then to look at anger and to use our wisdom in order to see that there is no reason for becoming angry in that particular situation. Otherwise, if we don't use this process through which we see that there is no reason to become angry, anger is not justified, it would be so hard to put a stop to anger. If it is so hard to put a stop to anger, it would be, of course, very hard to practice patience. So when we practice patience, we might practice it with a partial state of mind. Like, for example, with your family members, with your friends, with your close friends, and so forth. We might find it easier to practice patience with them because in our mind, we think that, well, those people are helping me, they're benefiting me. So that's part of the reasons that we use patience in our relationship with those people. But if we practice patience in this manner in which we also have at the back of my mind that idea that those people are helping me, they're benefiting me, and therefore I'm patient with them, this type of patience is not included within the perfection of patience. Because in the perfection of patience, we need to be inclusive with respect to all sentient beings, all living beings. And in order to do that, then it means that the practice of the perfection of patience needs to rely upon compassion. And then in order to develop compassion, we need wisdom, which means that the development of compassion that supports the practice of the perfection depends upon wisdom. Mm. Mm. So can you use compassion in order to cultivate patience? Like, for example, when anger arises towards other living beings, and you recognize that those people are suffering, those sentient beings are suffering. So you then think that may they not suffer. Well, you see that they're actually harming you, acting in a certain way that is not fitting you because they're suffering. So can't you use compassion as a reason or as a mechanism for stopping anger? Tadi kontrol kaagi che du ninja going di kandachi na spena kontrol sasa di senje shimba chi inarwa konzo dungen yungi yores dungen nyombala tene ngala nuba chigire ngala dinde chigire samne ninjas tene sanotawaina konzo dungen yungires ninjas komaina dila tene kontrol kana Chizan don kondro kawaina soban yamlendi ninja latene yongi rest and lamna digerves. Soban yamlendi ninja latene gombaina kandichinas.
다 ninji 연하다 아니 공르기 말았어. 내가 저 ninji 만다니다 공르지 끼거래. 이내 오늘 그 비기 다지 당한 저 쇼질이야 콘토는 들어와이나. 근데 전주 셰샤진 당한 저 전주 비기래야 쇼 장바인데 전주기 공부 시선치는 들어와이나. 아니 콘트로기 소비 냠네 쪼디 콘트로 가야 되지. control 가츠디 control 슬라운디 control 슬라운디 same thing 니 피길이야 트드레지 그러 control 사운디 same thing 니 트드레지 진짜 control 님이 따위터니 control 가단 직송거다스 그래서 아니 가서 따지 카투리아 펜슈디 차고서레스 로 control 세운디 랑기 same 트드로고요레 랑기 샘 툭 들어와이나 아니 자와 가르치네야 릉아 이승 르 남규이나 야부텐 투 말에 계자이나 따다시 투 말에 삼로이나 따다시 땅 투 말 디만투디 참만 툭 들어야지 샘 투할 때니 연구 연자 따 아니 샘 투는 단 디그 말에 삼송기 뒤따도다 콘드리 님이 딘지지 아니 따도 샘려야 공야지요나 아니 control 사약 가서 게임 채원디 아니 가야 소보검 투약이 탑시디 연구였어리스로
Had we had compassion towards sentient beings, we would not get angry. No, we get angry because our compassion is not sufficient. Is not developed enough. And because of that, we get angry with others. So looking at the different texts that we use to put a stop to anger, like for example, here we are studying Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, and the patience chapter is was written in order to put a stop to anger. So just when we look to begin with at the word anger in Tibetan, the word is kondro. It implies that there's a deep state of disturbance that is present in the mind. The mind is completely confused, completely disturbed. This is you can say, one of the etymological explanation of the word for anger. So first off, we look at the shortcomings of anger, and this is what Shantideva speaks of in the patience chapter. He speaks a lot about the shortcomings of anger. How anger, first of all, is a distorted state of mind. And when the mind becomes completely controlled, thoroughly controlled by this distorted state of mind, we act in a certain way, physically, verbally, and mentally. And whatever we do with our body, it is distorted. Whatever we say with our speech is distorted. Whatever we think in our mind is distorted with a mind that is completely confused. So as Shantideva says, what we need to do is to always be mindful of the drawbacks of anger, to always think that when the mind is controlled by anger, this deep state of disturbance, then whatever we do is going to become distorted.
내가 domba 탐지 기프티 토마토디 베나 게닝 domba 레온디니 체네 아니 창통야디 좀 된디 나오 자원이니 여말 손대게 가샤 쪼디 샘 축조요 반사 디레도 asra 아니 셴바 카르진다 베카뚝 샘 축조야디 아니 니뇨라다 창동야디 샘 축조원자 샘 축바이나 아니 저 참말로 축조원자 아니 창동야디 녀바 치슈스 되고 디차건자 아니 콘트로가 되신기 샘드 축조원자 아니 저도 쇼도거스 된자 아니 콘트리 녀미디 양도 삼야티 아니 개체슈 하도도 당한주지 지당 안주 소소소 미리 남주리 비 상을 당당히 가리는 용초가 되느냐 안주 냠는 지온디 아니 지비 용지려야 아니 또니 아니 냠는 지야디 베마스바 개체 못하고 그랬어 저 딘디지 비 안주 규바다 람름 기치균을 서버 개체 무슈 쓰대야디 안 안주 샘나야 가리는 코र्स이건자 비 거름다 마순 딱딱진 루투메반자 람딘 디난치니 응게 담아도 딘제로 왔어. 다 딘디질이야 인치미 또진 베나 제소파신 주고 돌아야 수술로종 지거나 백전죽도 숑 딘디질에 또 디나로에 주 당부 아니 가르송도 디 야니한테 때지 당부 자신 되고만 살소만하신 이 아니한테 됐디 디그마 송당디 야부 수수 샘나 방득도 와나 디니 디탄다데 쌈 담바샤 타만인 쟁고는 냠슬레사 딘지 nenga 투고서레스라 이네 계란 공주 야부도 되네 조팅 안주 쇼질에 또신 냠네 제단 로트나 덴덴 팽그레스.
So we take different vows in the Buddhist traditions. Like, for example, we take upon ourselves the vow of approaching virtue, the lay vow. And of the things that we can decide to abstain from in the vow of approaching virtue is the drinking of alcohol, which is one of the main prohibition that is connected with the vow of approaching virtue. And it is mainly prohibited from the, if we take upon ourselves this vow with this branch, it is mainly because it brings about a mind that is disturbed, this disturbance or confusion of mind with other things that are related to the vow that might not directly bring about this disturbance in the mind, but with the drinking of alcohol and so forth, they do bring about directly that sense of confusion and disturbance. And because of that, when we act based upon a mind that is disturbed, a mind that is confused, then often our actions also become distorted or disturbed. So anger, likewise, is a disturbed state of mind. And whatever we do with that mind that is disturbed, with a mind that is confused, is also becoming disturbed, confused, distorted. And therefore, it is important to recognize the faults of anger. Now, as our approach to the thinking of anger and the way to arrest anger, to develop compassion and to arrest anger, we are different to each other, and therefore it is likely that we will have different approaches, different ways of thinking and so forth. And therefore it is important that we get used to using certain procedures for arresting anger, developing patience and so forth. And the procedures that we use have certain lineages. So it's important to use lineages that are authentic lineages. It is important to make sure that we base our approach on those great philosophical systems. Like, for example, here we study Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, or we might study also the Lamrim tradition, the steps of the path of enlightenment. So the procedures that we use in order to develop patience and in order to put a stop to anger, they have a valid source, but they also have a lineage to those procedures. So we approach that, first of all, since here we're studying Shantideva's Guide to a Bodhisattva Way of Life, we approach that first of all with studying. So just like Lama Tsongkhapa said in one of the verses that he composed, first of all, I sought extensive studying. So this is what we begin with. Then we contemplate that. As the second line says, then those teachings done to my mind as instructions for practice. And then we put them into practice, as Lama Tsongkhapa said, and day and night I practice them with great effort. implemented these yogas with great effort.
There's the Jan Sherab di Kalakawa Shuch. Negab Shashan and Digretos. Lavrasra. The Dishaya Chun Remodos. The D Tishana Chun Digomars. And the Tangung give Tambatsu, Gumuluduni, Chinda, and Jomden Delia, Tebopiondi. So tea. 아니 직처 남기 대코나니 내루 대코나니 아니 쳇다와 시치니 아니 마 도잘레 아니 송샤와 디고네 따티 대보 초도 줘디 안 디인신 송여라스라 다 디인자 디nen가 슈치 차고레 nen가 슈차디기 덴덴 깔카우 차그라스다 레라우지 용고 말아스 레라우 메사 깔카우 요사딜이야 아니 계란 소비냠레 공구 있라인자 아니 까투블이야 서버텐치 라 아니 간투주도 집어나 아니 배 사주 침부스 라 소스 배는 추적 가시질 상론 땅에 뒤 저기 아니 펜도 자침부 용해지 디텐딘 차고 왔어레스 라 딘서 셔럽세디 아니 조딩한 저기 타투사디 셔럽을 투여반디 가스나 dungar gitsawa di mariba kanji dunga degu mebanza dunga sego wanza dunga gitsawa di mariba reslavras mariba said bigi chi yul manthon azam mariba tsam mayimba yul nilu ya dekona nishin nilu dekona nilaya shinjulo do shugdingi lo tel shagoras is a digi nimbo di and da maybe tense di tola yani yan samlotan kalakabuyana ani be sosa dojanji ani jayu kunjosum chobapial soba malam gel soba nga di ten ji yabujion shos malam pe semtin malam gelchen do sidin rovaina nyamling tsawadi jotu wars ani sherab yungumundo nega shajana do samna dit khas tagda ngisam tagda ji desamaris ro.
Now, also you said that you find the topic of wisdom to be quite hard. So is it all right in this life, since we find it hard to, let's say, we're going to set it aside and do the things that work easier for us? Well, Geshe feels that that's not right to set it aside. And that when we look at, for example, the writings of the Indian masters, beginning with, for example, Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna praised the Buddha for the most supreme activity of Buddha, which is teaching reality on the basis of having seen reality just as it is, having taught it to others on the basis of seeing how things exist in a precise way. So since Nagarjuna praised the Buddha for this supreme act of teaching reality, if it is the supreme act or the highest activity of the Buddha, it also, you could say that it implies that it's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard, right? The insight into reality, the development of insight into reality is not going to be easy. It's going to be rather hard. And for that, we need patience. So you said that kind of, you mentioned also the practice of patience. Actually, when we look at the different types of patience, there's patience in which we develop the ability to work with difficulties, with austerities, with difficulties, and so forth. So we bear with those difficulties. We willingly take them up. And if we develop that type of patience, even if we do it for a shorter time, you might say that you find the development of wisdom to be quite difficult. So you try at least for a few hours to look at a certain topic and think about it and so forth. It is hard, but through working with these difficulties, it will bring about great benefits. So, for example, we say that we as living beings, sentient beings, we wish for no suffering, and the root for suffering is ignorance. The source of all the unwanted suffering that we experience is ignorance. And here we're not just speaking about not being able to see things, not knowing things, but primarily what we refer to is having a distorted apprehension of reality, an erroneous apprehension of reality. So this is the type of ignorance that we want to undo. Now, one area to look at would be just to study what reality is. But in order to do that, then we also need to focus on other activities, to build up the accumulation of merit, the accumulation of wisdom, to purify negativities and obscurations as things that will assist the development of wisdom, making prayers, making supplications, and so forth. So if we're not going to perform those activities, accumulate the collections, purify negativities and obscurations, the wisdom that we seek will not be developed. So also, if we neglect those activities, the accumulations, the purification, and so forth, that will not be right. It will not be right to neglect those activities. It will not also be right, of course, to neglect wisdom.
Direta Jada Nanzuta Subu Madeva Dindi, Younger Wasra, Sosu Subu Deva, Meva Junsen Chin, Tangi two Marin Samedi Jadanda da Link be Nangi Roj Legos in a ditchin some Yangos Maris, Chona Ani D Lelog Tele and Rudos, Daniel Niva. Daniel News landing it two maring in Jungle Marisambi, some Daniel Nivi Lelo shadows, the Kangros ra. The D any Susuma naming Sorosk, then the Chagos is. Any Pena Kamba Mingi, Laba Mingi, Ming Mingi, Sogia Pigi, Kalijab, Turijavni, Chetudas. Any Nazuchi Yalanga Chansan Sanding chick. Negative this Dev so the big of passion to be Yamnendi, and it's same Chiajinza, and it T Yongyalaya, Yamne Yongyalaya, Trovash Kietubana, and it big Yesanal Deni, and it same Trovingani, Yamne Chetuach, some down to Yachi, Yonsarasra. Then Lebados can share then it Kaburas, the Mebaina, and it Kamba lava pi ko khari kyo shoba ina ya sozu namjula dike songdang tungin jigirwa da jamba chi tungin jigi kyo shira mando asira dindi ro samdan ngi tugri samsung tu chego samsung kanji lodop kaza songna shibana jing lodop ki tu ba na den khari na donlen chi tugri asira din sobi nyamne yakshi de de chaga asira.
So of course, certain things are difficult to us. Now we have our own areas of difficulties. And when we deal with those difficulties, often we think that I can't do it. It's hard. I can't do it. All of us have those thoughts, right? So we then have to remind ourselves that we ought not to think that we cannot do it, because this is laziness of looking down on ourselves. Right? When we tell ourselves that I cannot do it, it is laziness of looking down on ourselves. It is belittling our own abilities to do things. So of course, there are certain things that are difficult, but we ought not to completely believe the mind that thinks I cannot do it. So, in order to think about it, we can think of different points, like, for example, thinking about people that have physical disabilities. So someone might be blind, someone might be missing a limb or limbs in general, arms or legs and so forth. Then they might experience difficulties to a certain degree, great degree or lesser degree, but we can see that many of them also are quite capable of accomplishing great things. With the development of the 6 perfections, we take them up primarily as a mental practice. We practice them with the mind. So even when we lie down in bed, even if physically we feel that our well-being is quite poor, still the ways that we can engage the mind in practice, even when we lie down in bed. Of course, if our disability is in intellectual disability, that would be much harder. But here, in practicing the 6 perfections and so forth, we need to then recognize that we can do those practices We need to develop courage. We need to develop determination in our mind to be able to do them, and not listen to the mind that tells us that I cannot do it.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of other questions that Jane sent me, but there is a question here that Ollie sent, which I think that is related to Yesh's question about the giving and taking. So I'll take that first and then go to Jen's question. So Ollie is saying the suffering we take on in Tonglen must obviously include all 3 levels of suffering. This is rather a lot to think about. Are all 3 included in the cloud of black smoke that we visualize in Tonglen practice, and is the absence of these 3 levels of suffering the happiness that we envision for beings? Dila Tonglen gondorwa ta mikbachewa na yandi shengi dunge tsu lemba ina ani tuwa nakpo namba chen de gongogorwa ani shengi dunge tsu lemba gomba ina ta dunge sum meba chewa ina ta hacham pe misiwa de gebo tone samlo tang gogorwa mobe che gogorwa pekale kaudusa chesan kran samna di kesi tuwa nakpo namba chen di gomba ina namba de gowa ina dunge songa den inchiminchi gongo gurves taj de chikche yan shenla dewa pa tawaina ane dewa se di dunge su mebe dewa pa tango gurves dewa dagana gurves
Lasa tajda tonlen gomwandi ra tonlen gomwandi ta lama ri rochik songdo asra songyores inju ani manzo lama chebe nawala ya majudro de dunga ko maluta de dala member show se dagi dege shala tama se tindigi komye de redos tena chi kashi to nabo a kashi pet chi ani chala soba ani kanji tindiji teso ko pengejila pengiorwas lola mundrongejila chomeje thongo nge tindi nge kosonsra peti ani kenza dini thonding da dini yorwas ti tenza yijimi gi to nagbo gomgorse yomaris.
But to begin with, there are different modes of explanations given by different lamas. So one lama might tell you to visualize it like this, another lama will tell you to visualize it like that. So it is just like the Guru Puja says in one of the verses, bless me so that all the suffering, hindrances, obstacles, and so forth of all sentient beings ripen upon me right now, and may send happiness or well-being to all and well-being to all sentient beings, or may I invest all sentient beings in a state of happiness. So for some people, this description of visualizing suffering as clouds of black smoke works, but for others it is completely awkward. And you might hear a description of visualizing black smoke or black soot or dust or ash and so forth. Different things work differently for some people, whereas Geshe had other people commenting on that, saying that it sounds completely awkward and it's quite useless to think about it like that.
아니 ngazuda tongnen sanammandu pige ninji chanjugu sam gongdangki ro damga che chodu gyowaji jonjuk chemu chagoras dinangla ya tonabu kechi che jesa jemasons ro 아니 장고람 zonga bachimbo 조지 반대 아티샤다 람람 그 템비 다고 아니 조지 반대 아티샤 다 피 touch 람드 디게 빼 gondende 동하니까 슬랍 초거스 잔 바시우 슈진 칭이 장고람 zonga bachimbo ras 대나노라야 도나고 있겠지 인제 마스스라 딘다 이나 제적을 했어 제적을 했어 인지미 고르세야디 이 칙디 티타디 티테스 가고르 인지미 고르세야디 요 말했으라 딘자 타간지 인지 냠네 제단 잔죽 쌤 곰단지도 왔으라 빙아즈 세미시 걸려야 제단 동네리네 조디 디톨을 삼로 까지 아니 삼로 땅투와 디츠기다 아니 잔죽쌤 인지기야 잔죽쌤기야 디팽거도스라 디팽 세우 쇼진 야가르 케버츠 찍미님이 돈에 디송도 왔으라
죄송한데 ninja combaina chanju sengoina di dunga sunga tola gebochene samtang.
디 somtanton 야가르와다 라
So the main instructions here are instructions for the development of compassion and bodhicitta. These are, at least when we look at Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, the development of compassion and bodhicitta are here regarded as the supreme instructions. And then when we look at the way that Shantideva explains the way to develop bodhicitta, it does not speak at all about visualizing black smoke and such clouds of black smoke in the practice of giving and taking. And also when you look at the writings of the great Tsongkhapa, when he explains the practice of the mind of enlightenment, compassion, mind of enlightenment, he doesn't speak about it on those terms. When you look at Atisha's lamp for the path of enlightenment, which you can say that Latisha was the main owner of the Lamrim tradition, when he spoke of bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, also he didn't speak about those visualization of visualizing smoke and so forth. Now, this is not to say that you ought not to do it in your meditation, but it's just emphasizing the point that the different modes of explanation, and when you look at the writings of the great masters, then it's hard to actually encounter those meditation instructions in their writings. So the main point in those meditations, particularly when you look at the writings of Lama Tsongkhapa, in which he explained in his meditation guide, his States of the Path of Enlightenment, which combines both sutra and mantra, it speaks of mainly the development of compassion and bodhicitta. So that's the main thing to put into practice when we practice giving and taking, or the four immeasurables. The main emphasis is on the development of compassion. So then, in order to develop compassion and bodhicitta, you need to think extensively of the three types of suffering. Geshe says, if you can do that, that's the best. The more extensively you can think of the three sufferings, the better you'll be able to develop compassion to other sentient beings, and therefore also bodhicitta towards others.
조지반데 아디샤기 송 렌도 이마가 조지반데 아디샤기 송 가르나 열생 미징아 계집에서 이때디 시 카드 테마서 디 찬줄람중 그 란딜 나노야 도 찬줄람중 란딜 나노야 테레 아니 디 송단 디페나 산지쳐도 소주 쳐놈라 찬주버도 단 껴수지 다기 진소 예반데 다기 롤페지 산지를 버쇼스 아니 여러분이 다기 지소 집이 총는 기잖아 아니 랍침분 도스네 송도스라 디지디게 다 여러분이 송대 개침부 쇼지 아니 쇼집에 도섬시는 송로스 아니 조집반대 아디시게 다 아니 도섬 쇼진 진 송여라스라 직대선 자고 말았다 디베디다 이번에 소소로지나 다 케버지에메스 조지반데 안디샤다 야오르모치리아 수수생올레 케버지에메스 메디타카고레야 아니 비기 찬줄람드는 여바나시 진 땡구여스 카고레야 야오르모치 송 비기 찌디 규르니 땡구여스라
Georgia tishala kariyo resa di mixe kariyo res chia dirbe yamane di kariyo re
되게 되는마 데니스 양자식시하고라 계직들이라 하는데 이들이 제기였어
말해 디 그런 담보 미카시 George la Carriores and the Kirchine
조직 송 가리나를 요레스.
Cardinal Yore.
산지 추 소마디
Hmm.
조직
Okay,
송을
okay.
쓰기도 송 가리나를
alright.
요레스가 계시지.
Now, the verse that we use for refuge and bodhicitta is, we said that it was composed by Atisha. Now, someone asked Geshe, where in the writings of Atisha do you find this verse for refuge and bodhicitta? The verse that we use at the beginning of this session, to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. By accumulations I gather through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to be able to benefit all sentient beings. So where in the writings of Atisha do you find this verse? Well, you find this verse in the auto commentary written by Atisha to his own Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. And in his auto commentary to this text, he mentioned this verse for refuge and bodhicitta. To the Buddha, the Dhamma, and Supreme Assembly, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. By the merit I collect through generosity and so forth, may attain the state of a Buddha to be able to benefit all sentient beings. So Atisha has said, by the merit I accrue through generosity and so forth. His Holiness the Dalai Lama took that verse and made a slight change according to the way that he thought about it. He said that rather than thinking of by the merit that I accrue through generosity and so forth, or by the merit I create through generosity and so forth, he said by the accumulations that I collect through generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha for the sake of all. So when you think about those two verses, you can say that in essence, there's not a great difference between them. They're not too different. Geshe sometimes says the verses mentioned by Atisha, and at times he recites the one that was taught by His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
대당이 게제도 지지는 데메로 차가나 하모스다. 간지 ngaran sam nolaya nganzu nambe chedi chomden dilaya chomden di songra wasra chomden di chedi chuzu chema meba di siwu chin dengi di ani jagar gi loben namba sorwas tinza kon nambe gi kang songba di shis shabe toni ani nyamnen chetu baina zangma shuch resangudus 지당이 디시샤부터 말해서 쉬고 말다. 아주 베베시에다데 지게시에다 로가시에다 산서 캔자들이 코스기도. 대변나 땅이 가드나 다 제롬 지금 송딘딜이야 가졌다 두두 제기연자 아니 제롬 지기 곰불루드 아리안데와 산지장 반덴 다와타바 아니 조지 반데 아디샤 야시오 시월 콩 남비기 베데 식줄 제단이 지니 제마지진지 마 시샤지니 아니 디츠 세부 소고야디 세부 선난 디니 제기도스라 데페 마세와 계심보레샤 나라셈 디상고도스 딘자 야갈 케비기 숑 두즈나로라야 강 여바 로종디 단지시와 나지 당부 자신 퇴보 만드사세 뜻을 야고 장치 안 디텐 삼치 아니 냠nen체 고치수바나 자마 쇼직 라 아니 디 하마고디 아니 수수기 게비신인 레야 아니 게지티 다 디기 직 롱균 치균라 소바디 게비신일 때는 용국으로스 라 딘승이 단지 쉬야 산지 추종을 빼자고야디 야ವ름지 딘디 송여레스 갑걸링이 야ವ름지 송다 나신지 땡구여스 이는 이 측줄디 조지반데 아디시 코로나랑 다가는 송에서 디 수수 셈나라야 비기 뜻 교와 땅에 데버로 추니 매바인자 갑걸 다가랑 짓된구여스 드리스로
Now, you might be wondering, what is Geshe getting at, since it's not connected, not related to the points that we've discussed before? Well, what Geshe is wanting to say is that we study untainted teachings that came to us from the Buddha, the Bhagavan. And we studied that based on explanations that came to us from the Indian masters, Indian Pandits. And this constitutes the basis for our practice. So if you stick with us, Geshe feels that you'll find that what you put into practice will be clean and tidy. Now, in saying that, Geshe does not imply, is not implying that explanation that you get from others Lama is not clean and tidy, that you need then to disregard those explanations because they're not clean and focus just on the writings of the Indian masters based on teachings of the Buddha. This is not what Geshe is implying. What is implying, what he's wanting to say is that when you look at the writings of Lama Tsongkhapa, as Lama Tsongkhapa explained the words and the terms and the phrases that you find in the writings of Nagarjuna and Aryadeva and Buddha Palita and Chandakirti and Atisha and Shantideva and so forth, you get the sense that Lama Tsongkhapa really emphasized the word explanation, the explanation of the wordings of this text, which means that he really stayed closely with the text that he studies, the text of the Indian masters. So just as he said in this verse, first of all, I sought extensive study. And once the meaning of this dawns clearly to your mind, then, and you study those teachings, there are points that you don't understand clearly and you can take it up with your lamas, with your spiritual teachers. You can ask questions and so forth, and in that you might also receive a reading transmission and an explanatory transmission and so forth. So all of this is based on, first of all, sticking to the text and picking it up as it is explained by those great masters. So Atisha wrote this verse, composed this verse for refuge and bodhicitta. And this is the verses Geshe said that this is a verse that is sometimes recited, sometimes it is his honest Dalai Lama's version with slight modification. But Geshe in his mind, he says that since this is the spirit that comes from Lama Tsongkhapa and his writing and so forth, he wished also to stay closer to the text rather than changing formats or kind of breaking away from that explanation. So in his mind, kind of he still sticks closely to the version of Atisha.
There been any sumja tamji dongardi any toa nagbo cure and dindigi toa nagbo di suzu pechi any lyons ma any temias come the naktum soraj canceraj tigi kazuski manzula sherab go to asra any sem sewu go to asra tijidi kanji nidizo any maris zawni ka shutu marwas 야부로스 이나야 난주지 아니 비기 찌기 조단 순전히 단주시원은 찌기 조단 순전히 야갈 케비기 송래야 또는 저와이나 아니 짱마쇼직 로 테레스 베나간주 깨져로지나 미 담부디시 니바디시 숨바디시 두 시원디 아니 깨져디 규로도스 아그 담부시행이 디기 디 짱짱냐로스 디 소르지 야갈 키비 저무치기 아니 쇼카봉한 동아리는 제바 야갈 키비 송 짠짠래야 뚜요레스 로 괜찮은다 맞아 제어 말모도 빼나 사드도 규 베기 아니 직 사원도 비거도 조름 거 딘디 돌지 또 온디더니 아니 규 비 곰바 체당 아니 페나로라야 케바 만부기 담아더요리 아니 야갈 키비 나로라야 Dramadayarita, di di any Gombuluda, Ayandewa, Pandawa Taba, and it's Shivala Soba, but the D lay a touching D bit sick Shezong ton, and it sick Jordan Koran, any Mandria di Kontuchinra, and lots of Jordan Korani, any Dutus Girwaina, any Kondil Digmund the sales so petty. She was Savage song your restra.
Now, with respect to this visualization, when you visualize this a cloud of black smoke being the aspect of the suffering of sentient beings, you breathe it in and it enters into your body. There are such explanations, but Geshe said that in his mind, kind of sometimes he wonders about breathing in that black stuff entering your body, entering your mind, it seems that in some sense it can make your mind become dark and gloomy, which is opposite to the development of wisdom, how it's going to work out in terms of developing that illuminating wisdom in your mind. It's a bit strange when you think about it. So, of course, you get such explanations from different lamas. But as it often happens with such explanations, you get, one lama says something, a particular explanation, passes it on to another lama. Then when it is passed on through a lineage of lama, through the generations, it's hard to keep track of the changes that occur in that mode of explanation. So here Geshe says that sometimes it works to just go back to the beginning, to go back to the writings of those great masters and stick with them. Like, for example, when you look at the way that Lama Tsongkhapa explained the writings of the great Indian masters, but even more so when you look at his explanation of the tantric system based upon the completion stage of the Guhya Samaja Tantra, he elucidated the actual intention of this tantra. He looked at the writings of Tibetan masters. He looked at the writing of Indian masters, right? So masters such as not only Nagarjuna, but Aryadeva and Chandrakirti and Shantideva and so forth. He based his writings on the writings of those Indian masters, and what he did in his writing was he was looking at words and phrases of those Indian masters and has interpreted them in comparing different renditions of those terms and different explanations of those terms. And in his explanation, he often analyzes words and terms and says that the explanation of this master does not make sense because of this reason or the other reason. The explanation of that master also does not fit because of another reason. Whereas I found that the explanation of this master works quite well. So Geshe, in Geshe's mind, this is his preferred mode of studying what we put into practice, wanting to make sure that at least we have a clear source. It makes it very clear to us what we put into practice.
대단한 니동 뉴스탄바니 단다바르드 테니 네임 디켄치니 찍지디 간줄라 칼카우베서 찍지디게 아니 타도니 다 자오름 지스베기 다 라마 체리체제게 송주망보 쇼치 아니 nye 고급 총여라서라 아니 타도니 자오름 지기 다배 송주망보 송디게 가드이나야 아니 잔주그 셈 공당 동문이 또베 세르 공당 때 코란송은다 대한 비기 아니 콘토사디 안치 오문주보다 쫄주체모 딩이 쏘친 도고도서라 대당라야 아니 검당 가르송유도 딘디질이야 아니 셈테치니 아니 존리 좀 토이나 야자자다마다 야부여레스로 야부여레스.
We've been experiencing difficulties since 2020 because of COVID-19, but you can say that one outcome of COVID-19 is that there are so many teachings now that are available online. His Honor Dalai Lama and other lamas as well have started to give more extensive teachings online. So His Honor Dalai Lama emphasizes in his teaching the development of compassion and bodhicitta. He emphasizes the development of wisdom, the wisdom of emptiness. And when you look at the masters that His Honor the Dalai Lama emphasizes when he speaks of the development of all these aspects, he emphasizes Chandrakirti's supplement to the middle way and Shantideva's guide to Bodhisattva way of life. So when we think of how am I going to meditate on how am I going to meditate on compassion and bodhicitta, wisdom, the wisdom of emptiness, we're going to meditate on them on the basis of these sources. And Geshe feels that this is what we should put effort in the development of our practice on the basis of these sources.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Now let's look at Jen's questions. So The question is, I'm going to try to share it with others. Not dedicating or dedicating wrongly influenced by the 8 worldly concerns. So dedicating these virtuous actions to the benefit of others is said to be a fault. Does it mean that it is one of the 5 faults of the shamatha meditations, and or is it a mistaken thinking or a negative action? Dila ngatso tanda ngoa gyaba tola keshik chundwa. Ta dila ngoa la nieba dende chik chumba ina pena ngoa magyawa ina nieba chikche. Yamana jikten chuge kunelane ngoa gyaba ina. Dia nieba chik sigirwa. Cheza gyawa chik sawa ina. Jikten chuge kunelane di ngoa gyawa ina. Di chiwa tandi kala geresina tingen zingomda la shinen gomda dila nyeba nga yorwa nyeba nga nane chik dugirves yamena ani dila tene nyeba chigirves yamena jik nga magyawa ina yamena jikten chugi kunilane nga gyawa ina sano tantan chinchi loba chigirves yamena dikpa chigirves kande chilagi yorves.
Terdan jigden chugi kon lanse jilaya chulan droyati kagbushu chagores. Ra jigden chugi di tsin dig tendres. Sosu gewi chawa kanchiba di tsin dig tendu mebayna gewa mayin balin judreg ta nyanga chag di chagores ra.
Well, doing something motivated by the 8 worldly concerns means that it is hard for whatever you undertake to become a Dharma practice. If it is motivated by the 8 worldly concerns, it's hard to regard it as a Dharma practice. Because doing something that is motivated by the 8 worldly concern is something in which you do mainly focused on this lifetime only. You're focusing on the affairs of this life, and therefore it is possible even for virtuous actions that you take to become non-virtuous because your focus is this life.
Dadi nyanga chishu dirasra. Ina nganzupe ani jigdin chugi sambati shukchitan kanji ani tebalaya gawa tang mebalaya magawala sobigi tindich ani chik nyanda la gawa nyingur la gawa o dindich da di nyanda nyingur se di se di chedu remato gewa chimalan rewamado asirwa tinza gewa cheba di pena ani choba piyando di susu nyanda nyingur chedu choba piwaina di chue chago marisra chue slawondi mantalaya ani gewa chima ani ngontu 공방토야 델리야 기온디 탈바 델리 기온디 탐지 김이 공방토야 딘지질이야 미비 아니 자와질이야 로고 그러서라 티지디 냥가 싸우베레스 지디 취기 듣는 거 봐나 초스키 차고 말서라.
It is of a great danger if our practice is governed by the 8 worldly concerns. It is hard to overcome the 8 worldly concerns. It is hard to rid ourselves of seeking praise, wanting to avoid blame, from wanting reputation or gain, and so forth. When we are controlled by those attitudes, seeking praise, not wanting to be blamed, wanting to be respected, wanting to find some gain, and so forth, what it means is that our main focus is this life, the benefit that we get from our actions pertaining to this life. So we might be making offerings, for example, in wanting to be respected by others, in seeking praise and seeking honor and so forth, which means that even the act of making offerings is not going to become a Dhamma practice if this is what we seek. So when we practice the Dhamma, our goal is, first of all, beginning with attaining temporary states, which are high states of rebirth as a human being or as God, or even further than that, to attain the state of liberation or the state of enlightenment on that basis. For that end, we practice the Dhamma.
Tadini ngo majavya ti ngo majavna 만주직 미유 maybe 내가 서로 시차로 다스라 미유 maybe 내가 제와는 디 초메기로 왔으라 디 소리지 다 미유 녜진치 야 샤도 바이나 미유 드 만드로 파르도 자와드 로데야지 자고라스 진짜 페나 아 깨워치마 덴드 콤반 토야라야 ngoja baina ani kewachima dendru komba towondi ani pigi monomgi karso miyu thatu badodi drup sarvas is a ku nibad tindi then zodo gorsta then tabi komba toya chid ngo baina ani tarwa top ondigi monom nibad zodo gorsta ra ta tamche gemi kongbala ya mini ani ngoja baina tamche gemi kongba mato badu 아니 게자디기 니버디 그 데브타도 탐지기 공부를 로사인자 디 마토버도 게자디 아니 게자디 데데바치 디체건자 뭐도 조상랑 오고를 세디 내가 디 디토고라서
And therefore, the eight weighted concerns are dangerous. Now, with respect to the fault of not dedicating, if we do not dedicate, it means that we're losing sight of our goal. So we're doing a particular thing, we're undertaking a certain task, but we don't have the goal vividly present in our mind. In that sense, we lose sight of our goal. And if we lose sight of our goal, then again, it might be pointless to do a particular thing. So in terms of not losing sight of our goal, we might have different goals. Like, for example, if we practice the Dhamma and thinking that on that basis, may I attain a good state of rebirth, a happy rebirth in my next lifetime. It is keeping a certain goal in our mind, but then we create certain potentials. And when a high state of rebirth, a good state of rebirth is attained on that basis, the potential that we've created is exhausted, which means that it was short-lived. Now, we might have a more far-reaching goal, like, for example, in dedicating our roots of virtue for the sake of liberation. So this potential will be exhausted once the state of liberation is attained. But if we dedicate our virtues for the sake of omniscience, then the potential of our roots of virtue will remain with us till our attainment of the state of omniscience, the state of complete enlightenment. And then, therefore, it will be a much greater potential that we create.
Yes.
All right, there's one more question from Jane. So what is the process of planting karmic imprints of different qualities on our mind stream? Since some imprint only stay with us in this lifetime, like Pratimoksha vows, while other imprints stay on our mind stream from life, from one lifetime to the next, from life to life. Is this process totally dependent on the quality of our ultimate bodhicitta? Tilla not so sure the kandachi in service, and not so le minda chigirwa le kashi shukchembore kashi shukchunchunre. Tadila tenengazo singular pacha shagirwa, pacha dila nuba minda yorwas. Jezan pacha nuba mindragi shatandi kandechi chagires, dan nuba mindawa kandechi chagires. Di pena Quran chiwa tanya dikala gires, and angazo sozo tabe domba lembaina, ani sozo tabe nuba di kewa dilama to shembala dogi ma rest and lagire. Quran pacha tan nuba pacha tan domba de lechi destur tangi yosare.
Are.
Ani de chi ani dean kesi pacha de tipo shochi vaina shembo shochi imbaina di tuntan chachugi semla tene kegeres karala tene kegeres.
Tirda pacha sedi nubalaya shagdosra. The nuba shukche the machi sedi nuba din jokshela ya tuyo ba da sewres da nibala ko rigni yugoda injimini ani gewi niba yungo marwa megi niba yorwas ra da dini niba di jogse gi pi da leg shaganza 단지 koran lawanage le delya 아니 슈크체종 요레스 정은 죽섬 참위 내지제바나 레디 슈크체레스 디긴 니버디 슈크체 요레스 디긴 제버디 아니 미야라야 베나 뒤적 찬시에나 아니 교보 미야라 소바다 아니 지 최종 찬시에나 아니 첨부 미야라 소바 아니 유린동 찬시에나 유린부 데야라 소바 딘디 캬버드로요서레스로.
So we speak about the placing of imprints upon our mind stream. So when we speak about imprints, what we're referring to are potentials, certain abilities or potentials. So those potentials depend in turn on the process by which they are placed on our mind stream. So there is what places those imprints and that the imprints themselves. And the relationship between the placing of imprints and the imprints themselves is affected by the way in which those imprints were placed upon a mind stream. So for example, so before we get to that, the potentials can be either potential of, they could be negative potentials or positive potentials. Positive or negative potentials depend basically upon the actions that have created those potentials, either positive actions or negative actions. Now, the performance of an action, which is what places those imprints, is influenced by, for example, the parts of the action. So for an action to be fully completed, the preparatory part, the actual performance, and the culmination of the action need to be completed. If those three parts are completed, it means that the actions become powerful. If some of those components are missing, the action is not powerful, it is weaker. Now, if you wonder what is the meaning of a powerful action, leaving a powerful imprint, well, what it means is that either a strong action will reach its fruition quickly, or that the fruition will mean that a great result will take place. And it can also mean that it will also remain for a longer duration. All of these are different forms of strong actions, right? So either in terms of the strength of the result, how quickly it comes to pass, and how long it remains.
데레다 가서 빼로 찾아봐나 빼로 찾아면 당아도 전주 예시 체버려 왔어라 전주 예시 체비 깔이야 정은 주스 찬장 상황이 가르치 왔는데 담보 년되고 꼴롱 숙천보치케 아니 년비 깔이야 서서 스스치 년 사회질이야 가시 조신 거니 가와 겁니다 디탄라야 상로 숙천보치 땅도바나 다 디게 깨지는 다 교정부 쇼질이야 세미나라야 템발이야 대 팽그러서로 딘니버티르다 단 아니 담보 지피게 최다 소리지니 아니 용 아니 녀비컬이야 까우컬 녀 까우컬 많이 안 타마들이야 딘도르나 안 참만 로스비질이야 세미나 슈치 상당사 하야메기르지 게시하다 용거라서로 딘니버 총디 레사요르데냐 레코 슈체 정답기 아니 샘닐이야 아니 템바디 슈체주 용거도스 어디 소리지 차고레스.
So just to illustrate that in a more precise way, we studied here together Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life. So to begin with, if our motivation for studying this manual was involved with developing, first of all, the wish to study this manual, to listen to the teachings, then following that, we listened attentively to the teachings, we were very careful or attentive when we came to class, and at the end we felt a sense of joy in having been able to do that. It means that the action that we have created became a complete action in relation to its preparatory part, the actual performance and the culmination, and that leaves a stronger imprint in the mind, in the sense that those teachings will remain with us, at least in this life, for a longer duration. we'll still continue to think about them from time to time. We'll be able to hold on to those teachings if we were to begin with, if we were interested in those teachings, if we have listened to them carefully, if we were attentive during classes, and we also felt a sense of joy for having being able to do that. So we can really check how long those teachings will remain with us. Or alternatively, it might be that to begin with, your motivation in studying this manual was half-hearted. You were thinking to yourself, rather than really wanting to study, you were thinking that I just want to try it out, check out what this text is saying. Then when classes were taking place, sometimes you were attentive and sometimes you were not attentive. And at the end of those classes or studying those different topics, your attitude was, when you say dismissive, you weren't making a big deal out of what was discussed in class. You weren't kind of happy about it and so forth. So it is likely that the karma that you accumulated on that basis would be weaker, right? It wouldn't be as strong as the karma that you have created while wanting to receive those teachings, being attentive to those teachings, and also happy for having been able to study this material.
근데 저직디 야부변도 비기다 소더기 동발을 자야지. 소더기 동발디 콜론라야 인종 상바 고거레스. 콜론라 인종 상바 고반자 아니 소더기 동발레니 셈기til라야 아니 박차디 니바디 아니 타와 마토 바드 아니 니바니야치 니바지 레고레스. 이네 동바코랑 데야디 아니 친디 마도 세표온디기 동바디 똥저거레스. 간스는 그 뒤쪽거라 아니 치식 마똥 파르드 랭긴신 담자 치어 마도 나 아니 타와 마토 바드 랭긴 사마기 바드 랭긴 담자 거려 말았어. 그래서 똥저에 산점디 뒤쪽거라 담보는 그 뒤쪽 니제 샤완서 다가란 되고레스라.
Now, another good point that came up in Jane's question, I'll put it on the screen again, was in relation to the Pratimoksha vow. So since some imprints only stay with us in this life, like for example, the Pratimoksha vow. So Geshe thought that it's a good reference because it gives us the opportunity to give some clarifications with respect to the Pratimoksha vows. So the Pratimoksha vows, the taking of the Pratimoksha vows is creating imprints in our mind stream, which means that we place some potentials on the mind stream. The potentials, the imprints of the Pratimoksha vows remain with us till we attain the state of liberation. But still, the vow itself is nullified upon the passing away from this life. In that, in the taking of the vow itself, we go through a procedure by which we make a commitment to take up this vow, to uphold it and to guard it for the rest of our life. Which means that the commitment that was made to begin with was not a commitment to retain the vow until we attain the state of liberation, or until we attain the state of enlightenment in the vow itself. And here we're speaking about the Pratimoksha level. So the Pratimoksha, so some of the vows in the Pratimoksha levels include a commitment that we make to guard the vow for the rest of our life. Since that is a commitment, then this vow is going to be nullified when we pass away. But still, the taking of the vow included placing some imprints, potentials on the mind stream, and those potentials still remain with us until we attain the state of liberation.
This.
Those. So there was one more question, sorry, almost forgot that. So there was one more question related to verse 12 in the first chapter of Shantideva's text. All right, so the verse says, this is, I believe, verse 12 in chapter number 1. All other virtues similar to the plantain tree are exhausted upon bearing fruit. Since the fruit tree of bodhicitta constantly bears fruit, it does not exhaust, it increases. This verse is in chapter 1. So is the mind of enlightenment here refers to uncontrived bodhicitta. And is it because it's part of the main mind that is able to spontaneously create causes for virtue and thus able to bear fruits without exhaustion? Dila 다 갑디라 디 찬조기생 펜윤도라 제시치 기하게라와 아니 펜윤디라 카라라게레스나 제보 메시지 베웨페 직샤게라와 제선 갑디라 찬조기 셈세 디 추마마 임바 찬조기 셈 추마마 임발라 자게르베스 아니 케시 추마마 임바 찬조기 셈 다란디 치와이나 펜토덴데치 라와이나 김센카리나스 디 chanchukisen chumama imba kiawaina ani gewa bemelundu kiegi nuba dilatene penyunden de shagirves kandechinas
je chanchuksem chumama imba se ani siudinji jargi mares chanchuksem keba kanji samjan thamji ki tensamjin samjan 탐지를 인지검 뒤도고다 즉 잔주고 쌤 아니 쯤어 준지 공이야 될어야 아니 제부디 연구요레스 간지 잔주고 쌤 검토 봐이나 내가 잔주고 쌤 검토 봐이나 잔주고 쌤 검수 가래 인지 dob기 아니 samjan 탐지기죠 아니 라나마 왜한다 저 산지 공부 마토는 지금도 토바 최고 냠비기다 아니 탐제증 쌤디 딜라고라스 딜인지미 주마마이와 인고고 말레스.
So here the benefit that is attributed to the mind of enlightenment, making the results of bodhicitta inexhaustible and increasing, is not attributed only to an uncontrived bodhicitta. It is thus also with contrived bodhicitta, which is still aiming at the welfare of all sentient beings and is based on compassion. So even if it is contrived, since it is based on compassion, such benefits still ensue. So if we meditate on that, if you can meditate on that, you begin with meditating on compassion, thinking how great it would be for all sentient beings to be free from suffering. It would, for me, be imperative to liberate sentient beings from suffering. For that end, I will attain the state of enlightenment to free sentient beings from suffering. So even if it is meditated upon at this stage in a contrived manner, it still brings about such benefits as described in chapter number 1.
데리다 잔주구선 주모마이 밖에 왔는데 배우디 다 용용 바라왔어. 배우디지 다 용용 바라왔어. 간지 잔주구 샘래야 땡고야디 아니 잔주구 샘래야 땡바이나 아니 제부 메세바 페완교야디 용거리스 송고르스 간지 잔주구 샘 내가 침부 쇼이바디 송고여마도 그냥 물론 디갸발야 인지민이 잔주구 샘 주모마이 보고르도 딘디 송고여 말했어.
And of course, needless to say that such benefits would also be the benefits of uncontrived mind of enlightenment. So such benefits, making, for example, the results become inexhaustible and still continue to increase, are benefits that come from meditating or cultivating bodhicitta. So in our aspirations, rather than keeping them limited only to an uncontrived bodhicitta, we can include also contrived bodhicitta. May I be able to develop bodhicitta?
내가 잔주쌤 공부할래야 아니 잔주쌤 좀 많이 배우고 매웠어.
잔주쌤 공부할래. After all, just to meditate on bodhicitta, we don't have to generate uncontrived bodhicitta.
Page Dixabda.
So we'll leave it here for now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Baja Rugmiya Ho Wanchen Segi Sashi Om Baja Rekiya Ho Chi Chari Koyogi Kowe Onsu Gyapori Rasha Lupapo Lo Zambuli Nu Palanchu Chandra Minya Luta Lupa Ngayam Tangayam Shen Yoden tala chodro dramin yenta dramin yengida rinpoche riwo pa sangishin dojo yompa mamu paye loto kolo rinpoche nobu rinpoche sumo rinpoche lombo rinpoche mabu rinpoche tacho rinpoche mabu rinpoche Teche poyen macho magarma meto ma tupo ma natse ma cheche ma nima dawa rinpoche du chole namba gyawe gyatsen usulata mi benjo punsu sopa ma tsawa meba Sanshin do won wa jida chi te tawa tang yu pa chebe pa den lama dampa ke ban ke ba du yang ge we shen yen chen po ge she fun sun sun rin pa sambo shen la te pa chen bo sun chu samo le pa to pa ka din ta ra gi yon du shin kan bu wa gi Tuje dowe dundu shesu so shene magyen do re chen dang ke sen chen tang chen la tu tse wa chen bo go ne shin tin lam tu so shi jo shi me do Tahari Ravling Shi Nidege Adi Sanye Shindu Mikte Owa Iheroku Namda Shin La Chupasho Jetsun La Me Kutseraten Chinam Katin Le Cho Chu Ge Pa Lo Sa Ten Be Do Me Sa Sum Hi Do Nye Mun Sel Ta Tu Ne Gyo Guru Ratna Mandala Kani Ataya. Let's do some serious dedication. Gewadi Nyududa Lama Sangye Jugyone Doa Chikyamalupa De Sala Gopa Sho Chanchu Semcho Rinpoche Make Panan Ke Gyuchi Keban Yamba Me Payang Gone Gondu Pewa Sho Kanri Rawe Kowe Shinkan Pendan Dewa Malu Juwene Chenre Siwan Tenzin Gyatso Shape site bardu thank you chi tu tsu chan chin jang gung ya we ten zin kyong pe we gong zo do po tse cho song ko we le mon tru du pa ha da so du je gung du sha ten sho.
Lava sum de ngul ming zin ba yin du bin so ji nen de yong gang shin da du shi du cha yu sin de tu din cho jur ji bi ta shi sho chu ji je bo zung ga bi chun zu nam ba pe wa ge jin san ma shi wa dang tun jian ma lun sang war sho da dang xin ji tu sum dang je Tsonyi la deni jawa lo sang cha pa ye tenpa yu rin pa gyuru ji ming me tsewe te chen chen rin zik chen min chen rin ka chen kempe tsu jen tsung ka pa lo sang cha pa sha lo so wa ming me tsewe te chen chen rin zik chen min kempe wang ka chen kempe tsu jen tsung ka pa lo sang cha pa sha lo so wa ming me tsewe te chen chen rin zik chen min kempe wang po chan pe ya ka chen kempe tsu jen tsung ka lo sang cha pa sha lo so wa de 새로 건도 자와 중간에 텐조신이 무슨 제비 야병합에 남산 되는 게 지금이야 도벌 마큐르지. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sorry?
Can I just hold it? Okay. Sorry. Not allowed to use that. Well, this has been an amazing 15 months. What? That's all right. I don't need to be in it. This has been an amazing 15 months. I mean, in April last year, well, March last year, we really didn't know if we were going to be able to go on with what we were doing. Fortunately, we had the confluence of Margot getting stuck here, but being here with her capabilities, Geshe willing to teach, Kartzen willing to learn all about the technical side of things and help with that. And we were able to put this wonderful course that we've had out to the greater public, as well as those few people who were able to stay here through COVID. And gradually we've been able to come back together. And in a lot of ways, I often say to people that COVID has been not a problem for us, but something that's actually made our program grow. So it's interesting that Lama Zopa has been doing these thought transformation teachings right through this. And we're actually seeing COVID isn't necessarily a problem. So thank you very much. We have a lot of people to thank through this 15 months of amazing times. First of all, of course, Geshe. I have a little present for Geshe.
It's probably a new Barbie kit. Yeah, actually, you can step in. Dhanyavad. Thank you. Thank you. No, it's okay.
Confidence and happiness to me personally and to many of the other people. I mean, the number of times we go, oh, Turkey, what do we do with this? Oh, Turkey, can you help with that? And she's always there. So thank you very much to Venerable Turkey. I was going to ask for Geshe to give these presents, but maybe it's difficult for you to come up with. I couldn't do this. You all don't know how much he does, but I couldn't do this without Sonia.
Yes.
You can clap actually. You come up. Really. What is totally fantastic is that every single teaching has been transcribed and has been out to people. So it's just been fabulous. And really a lot of that work, you doesn't transcribe every one of them, but a lot of the work that you thank you so much. You do.
Thank you.
And we don't know where the hand mic is. Under which altar? Can I just ask Margot if I can just go ahead like this for the moment? Well, will some maybe some,
Yes, I mean, you can go like this, but I think the hand mic is under the altar on the right.
I don't have very much more to do, so I think it's okay.
Yes, with this, okay.
It's okay. Sonia, could you come up and hand the gifts to people? Then I don't have to keep putting it down and endanger it. Thank you. All right. Don't sit down, Jason. Oh, you have. Okay. Every single teaching has been recorded. Every single teaching has gone up onto Dropbox. And there the transcribers get it. There they can send it out to you. Other people who can't get the Zoom things are getting Dropbox. I've got a woman in Switzerland who is taking things down from our Dropbox. And Jason has put every one of those up. Thank you very much. Oh. Okay. Margot, are you still there?
I am, yes.
All right. None of this would probably have been possible without Margot. Can we see her face?
Oh, I'm a little bit tired today.
No makeup.
It'd be nice to see your face anyway. I mean, hey, I'm very tired today too.
Okay. Well,
Anyway,
I think you can see me.
very little of this would have been possible without Margot and the work that she's done. And she's high.
Thank
cold today too.
Thank you.
So thank you from all of us for all of the work you put in, not just here but all the other work, but in particular we're talking about how you've enabled us to put the basic program teachings out to a huge number of people. Otherwise, we would have had this little tiny handful and maybe we wouldn't have been able to continue. So thank you very much. And your present, we will give to, who could give it to Margot? Oh, we'll put it in your mailbox for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just because I have no brain anymore. Oh, Sharab's not here either. I wanted to thank her for her input. So Sharab's not online either because she's doing an exam, but we will put her present aside. And look, I should have presents for everybody in the room and everybody who's online, because really everybody has been part of this course and keeping it together and doing so much to support it over that time. So thank you to everybody. And now I do have a request of the people who are online. Could you all put your video on so that we can see you, and then we can have a group photograph together with Geshe and Kartsen and all of them. So if you put your video on and we can see as many of you as possible.
All right, so now is a group.
So now if we could all come up.
Yeah, come up for a group photo.
Sit down or something.
Slide over. Like a snake.
Now we'll have to take it in turns to take the photo, and Kartsen's phone being the best one. Oh. Who's got a good phone? Yeah? Oh, Margot said before to use Kartsen's phone. No.
All right. Thank you very much, people.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, people. Have a nice afternoon and see you next time.